you all so much for attending this year's State of the Environment Conference. I see many friendly faces in the audience, including people who participated on panels before. I see new faces too. I see students, so thank you all very much for being here. We launched this conference 3 years ago with the goal of educating our students about what's going on in our community and in our state with the environment, to showcase the work of our brilliant professors here, and to bring together interested people in the hopes of creating opportunities for collaboration. We feel really good that those 3 goals were met the last couple of years, and I think they will be this year too. I'm looking forward to really interesting panel discussions this afternoon with lots of opportunities for participation from the audience. The EELU program, and that's Environmental, Energy, and Land Use at Vanderbilt, is one of the highest ranked environmental and energy programs at any law school in the U.S. And we are really fortunate to have the wonderful professors on staff that we do. We're also very fortunate that the EELU program, including this conference, is supported by and made possible by the Shallenberger Brown Foundation. Kathy Brown is here today, Martin will be here momentarily, and I'd like to thank them for their support of the program and of the conference. It wouldn't be possible without their support, and I think it's making a real difference, so thank you. Thank you also to Caroline Cox, our program director, and Maggie Milam, our program coordinator, who have worked so hard to make this happen. And to Mike Vandenbergh, J.B. Rule, and Jim Rossi, who are the backbone of this program. Before we get started, just a few logistics. As noted on the agenda, we have 5 panels, and we'll conclude around 5 o'clock for a cocktail hour just outside this room. I hope you can stay for as much of the afternoon as possible, and that you'll have a chance to mix and mingle at the cocktail hour. But of course, feel free to come and go as you need to. Also, please know that students who are here may need to leave in the middle of a panel for a class. Just realize that. It's not that they don't like what's going on or what someone's saying. They just might need to leave. I hope all of you have been able to get a lunch. Everything in your lunch is compostable, and thank you, Maggie Milam, for making that happen. So to throw your lunches away, these are compost cans on either side inside the room. Not outside the room, but inside the room. So if you throw them away when you finish. Also, in an effort to be environmentally friendly, we provided compostable cups instead of water bottles that are just outside the door near the water fountain. And the restroom is also outside to your left. We provided a handout with the panelists' bios, as well as a QR code with an online version. Thus, the introduction of our panelists today will be very brief in order to allow more time for discussion. The panels will be 50 minutes each in length with a 10-minute period for changeover and panelists. So again, no real breaks, but feel free to come and go as you need. And there will be coffee and cookies available mid-afternoon, just outside. Finally, for the lawyers in the room who would like CLE credit, if you would sign the sign-up sheet outside, we will email you the appropriate forms. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the moderator of our first panel on the state of the environment, Professor Michael Vandenbergh, director of the EELU program.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. So let's just give a round of applause to Ann Davis, who's really good. I've had the privilege to work with Ann, not only when she was the head of the SLC's founding partner of the SELC Nashville office, but also in her deep commitment to the community, and more recently on the board of the National Electric Service. And it's just extraordinary what she's done to help build the social capital behind environmental sustainability in Nashville. So I couldn't be happier to have you affiliated with our program. Thank you. So on top of that, just again, J.B. Rule, maybe raise your hand. He's going to be on a panel later today. He and I co-direct the Energy, Environment, and Land Use program. We couldn't do this without the support of the Sally Shallenberger Brown Fund and Kathy and Martin's help. And we do can't tell you thank you enough for doing that. Also, Caroline, who's here, raise your hand, runs our program. We're going to lose Caroline, but for a good reason. She has a tenure track position at Boston College Law School starting later on this summer. And that's a habit we are developing here. One of our panelists today, Mariah Caballero, has a tenure track position at Wellesley College too. So if you have kids who are thinking about colleges and want to get well trained, look for Mariah. We'll talk more about that in the future. Maggie Milam just does a terrific job for us managing budget and logistics issues. And then Ethan Thorpe, who's on the panel here too. We're going to try to keep him for another year at Vandy. He's an outstanding undergraduate who's just done remarkable work on our new Private Climate Governance Lab, which we're going to talk about at the end of today. So I'm going to cut the panel short. Right at the end, I have to teach a legal embarrassment, which is implied easement upon a quasi-easement, which produces really difficult cases, and I'm going to go do that. So we're not going to run over here today. But what are we talking about? Well, in 1970, January 1st, 1970, President Richard Nixon signed in front of a national public audience the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. And it included a provision for an annual report on the state of the American and global environment. And that report was produced all the way through until 1997, when in what I think was a flawed interpretation of a Paperwork Reduction Act requirement coming out of the Gingrich Congress, that NEPA reports were canceled. And they were canceled by the White House Council on Environmental Quality. They have not been produced since then. Why were they so important? If you're thinking about how do we rationally regulate, how do we avoid regulating when we don't need to? How do we put resources in places that will do the most good? You kind of want to know what the state of the environment is and where it's going over time, right? And that's what the CEQ reports did. And so what we're doing here, for the most part, is trying to fill that gap. And we're doing it for Tennessee and for the Southeast. And we hope in the long run, this is part of a much larger movement where we will see state of the environment reports produced in every state in the United States. As the federal government backs out of doing more environmental protection, the states, localities, the private sector are stepping up in many cases. And if we have information about the state of the environment, then we can begin to do that in a really smart, rational way. And that's the idea about what we're up to here today. And so what we're going to see is that Ethan Thorpe and Mariah, who is just about to receive her PhD from HOD and Peabody, is essentially a geographer, would you say? Yeah. They're going to talk about the study that we just did, which is the next in our series of studies. And then ThinkTennessee's head, Erin Hafkenschiel, has led a really remarkable effort to look at all kinds of different data across different realms. And they do a piece of their study on the environment as well. So then Erin is going to step forward and talk about their report, and we'll see how the two compare. We'll try to do that very quickly and very efficiently to give this remarkably expert audience a chance to ask us some hard questions on that. So that's the idea of moving forward. I'm not going to introduce the panelists more. You've got long bios there. I'm not going to take your time on that. But let's jump off with Mariah and Ethan walking us through the state of the environment based on what you've done in your data analysis so far. And now to do that, do I need to get the right slides up? Yeah. Maybe we'll let Mariah do the slides because I'm a certified techno-peasant, by the way. That will become really clear. I am good at replacing chairs when a wheel falls off. So what you need to do is we need to turn this to the screen for a second. Okay, now what we need to do is advance the slides to pass them to Tennessee.
Oh, okay, and then we'll go back.
Thank you all so much for being here. This is about the State of the Environment report that we just put out. It's still in draft form, so if any of you have any comments or suggestions, we're really happy to hear those and would love to incorporate them either this year or in future years. So one thing that we did this year that was unique is we ended the report with 3 special issues on topics that are incredibly important to the year of 2024-2025. The first is on government data removal. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, many government websites are being scrubbed of mentions of climate or climate change or climate science, which is really, really undermining the ability, especially for underserved and frontline communities, to really adapt and forecast how environmental hazards will impact them. The second is on AI and energy use. So again, as I'm sure many of you are aware, AI is incredibly energy intensive, and it demands that we create this whole new infrastructure of data centers. So one of the reasons that President Trump signed the national energy emergency was in response to this concern about grid reliability and data centers. However, as we find, there's more hope than they may sort of project about using clean energy as a way to achieve both technological and energy gains in Tennessee and the Southeast. And the final one is on climate resilience. So Hurricane Helene just destroyed so many major parts of the Southeast and killed over 200 people in a hurricane that is, not to overuse the word, but is almost completely unprecedented. And so understanding how the Southeast is able to build resilience and build adaptation to these hazards and the increasing risk that it faces from climate is really, really important. And so we hope that you'll be able to read those at the end of the report. But for the body of the report, we began with conservation. And so as you can see, Tennessee is an incredibly biodiverse place. We may not think of it this way, but we have one of the most biodiverse freshwater aquatic species populations in the entire country. Unfortunately, over 500 of those species are listed as threatened or endangered. And Mariah will talk more about threats to river and lake health in Tennessee. Another important point is that almost 250,000 acres are protected by conservation easements. So basically land that is protected by either a government or private NGO in the case of over 50% of the lands in Tennessee, so that it can maintain its purpose as a land of conservation. And then finally, an important point is that Tennessee and the Southeast are the largest carbon sink due to land use change, and forestry in the whole US. And this is in large part due to the relative youth of their forests. And so if you think about trees, as they grow, they're sequestering more carbon per year, but that's not really a great way to measure our forestry contributions, because it's also associated with adverse effects such as lower air and water quality, as well as the fact that older forests tend to sequester more carbon overall. So the answer can't be to cut down old growth forests and replant. It really has to be a good balance between the two so that we're improving conservation while contributing to our climate goals. Speaking of climate, Tennessee is doing quite well on decarbonization, in large part due to the decarbonization of our electricity mix. And so while that's happening, we're still seeing a relatively high portion of emissions coming from transportation, which is in large part due to, one, low EV uptake, and two, large quantities of miles traveled. And so while there's really promising trends in Tennessee and the Southeast, there's still plenty of room to grow. Another important thing to note is, as I mentioned in the climate resilience piece, Tennessee is beginning to suffer more and more billion-dollar disasters, about 3 times as many over the past decade and a half or so as we saw over the preceding 3 decades. And so if we want to avoid Tennessee taxpayers and taxpayers across the Southeast from covering the bill, we really need to be investing in these resilience and adaptation activities so that these billion-dollar storms become million-dollar storms or become relatively less important. On the energy point, we can see that this decarbonization has in large part been driven by a shift from coal, which has dropped by over 40% in the past 3 decades or so, to things like nuclear, which we had the Watts Bar 1 and 2 plants come online since 1990, as well as a move towards natural gas, which made up a very marginal percentage to about 20% of our electricity mix. There's also a large portion of hydroelectric, but that stayed relatively stagnant over the past 30 years. One thing to note is that the energy burden, which means the percentage of one's income that they're paying for energy, is incredibly high for Tennesseans who are living at, AMI stands for Area Mean Income. So people who are living at the average income and below suffer significantly higher energy burdens than other places in the US, which is in large part due to lots of residential consumption.
All
Right, so shifting into air a bit, as Ethan mentioned, the sort of changes in the fuel mix have really improved our air quality, largely from, like I said, installing things like scrubbers and decommissioning coal plants, which has really improved both the sulfur dioxide emissions and the nitrous oxide emissions as well. This is a graphic that shows fine particulate matter by density of counties in Tennessee here in the blue. So you have low density to high density and the PM 2.5 values. The middle shows Davidson County as it relates to various other counties in the southeast. And then the orange here is showing average PM 2.5 values as they relate to large cities across the US, right? So it gives you a sense of what that air quality looks like in different cities comparable to Nashville. And then another point that we wanted to make about air is, as you mentioned, the value of EV uptake and the sort of value that it could add when we think about transportation emissions. So this is a graphic that is showing emissions as it relates to transportation for the United States, the Southeast region, the state of Tennessee, and then Davidson County as well. So you can see here that the percent difference from national average for transportation emissions is 62% higher than the national average in the US. And then in Tennessee, it's 16.7% higher than the national average, and then about 6%, I think, 7%, sorry, in the Southeast region. So we're seeing elevated, as we mentioned, emissions from transportation in the US. Moving into water, one of the first aspects that we looked at was the portion of rivers and lakes that are considered impaired for the state of Tennessee. We did see a slight increase in this for the state of our numeric report. So when we ran this in 2024, we saw about 61% and 47% of rivers and lakes impaired. This is a flip. So in 2022, we saw about 60% and 42%, and in this newer report, we saw 61 and 47%. So a slight increase in impaired waters for rivers and lakes in the state. And then this is a graphic that is showing, we also looked at health-based drinking water violations for both Tennessee and for the Southeast. So this is looking at community water systems. This is any system that serves a long-term population year-round. So, and this is the percentage of systems with a health-based violation, at least one, could be one or more. So the national average is about 20% or so of health-based, of community water systems have some sort of health-based drinking water violation. The Southeast tends to have about half of that, which is quite good. And Tennessee is sitting kind of right there in between the two. 15% of their systems having at least one health-based drinking water violation. Something of note is that when we looked at the data for Metro Water, or for the water system that serves all of Davidson County, they had no health-based violations for between 2019 and 2024. So it's a great water system. And then the last thing we looked at in terms of water was flood risk. And so this is showing census tracts across the Southeast and the risk of flood. And then they sort of zoomed into the state of Tennessee and then zoomed in as well into Davidson County. You'll notice that Tennessee doesn't have a ton of flood risk as it relates to the rest of the southeastern region. But importantly, when we see sort of these flood risk areas, there are also really high likelihoods of those areas having a sort of large proportion of low-income families. And so when we think about flood risk and vulnerability, I think that's going to continue to be really important. We didn't see very many census tracts considered low-income for the state of, for the county of Davidson when we think about flood risk. So those 4 census tracts might be something to consider as we continue developing and planning for flood risk. And then lastly, we added a section on waste this year, and this is showing carbon emissions from waste as it relates to Tennessee and both the Southeast there. So this graphic is showing how we're doing sort of across time. We have seen solid waste volume in Davidson County be more than double per capita of what we initially planned for. So I think we have some improvement to make there. And importantly, we also looked at health or drinking water violations as they relate to PFAS and PFOS. Those are chemicals that tend to find their way into water systems, and oftentimes because of waste, and those values are about 16.5% in the southeast and 11.9% across the nation. So we're doing a little bit better when you think about violations related to that in the state of Tennessee. So this is an overview, as we said, in terms of a lot of different indicators. We used a lot of publicly available data, and one of the real values, I think, of this report was that we had a lot of folks sort of provide coding and things last year that we were able to reuse, and so this is a very easily replicable report that we were able to sort of redo for this year, and we hope to continue that in the future. So thanks so much.
Great, and we'll take questions on that in a second. Let's get Erin's slides up. And so let's see if I can handle this. There's a chance I can, but
I will go ahead and start talking if that's
Good.
okay, Mike.
Please.
Okay, wonderful. Hi everyone, I'm Erin Hafkenschiel. I'm the president of ThinkTennessee. So thrilled to be back. Is this the second or third year that we've done?
Second.
Okay. Well, just thrilled to be here, and thanks, Mike, so much for putting this together. So for those of you who don't know much about ThinkTennessee, I'll just share a little bit. Well, actually, before I jump into that, I'll talk quite a bit about some of the data resources that ThinkTennessee provides, but what my slides are focusing on today is we did an energy fact sheet that we released in January that really focuses on energy affordability, energy reliability, and clean energy. So that'll be most of the data that I share with you all today. ThinkTennessee is a nonpartisan, results-oriented think tank that works to build a state where all Tennesseans are civically engaged and economically secure. Our energy and utility work fits within our affordability portfolio, and so that's why affordability is what we start with when we start talking around these issues. And we use research, engagement, and advocacy to sort of move policy ideas forward. We have a tremendous amount of research that has been coming out. Last year we released our first ever State of Our Counties dashboard, which provided 104 data points for all 95 Tennessee counties. It's an interactive map of Tennessee where you can pick the county you're interested in, the data point you're interested in, and see how that county compares to other counties across the state. Really encourage you all to check that out. And then we've released 4 different policy briefs this legislative session related to housing, childcare, paid family leave, and I'm forgetting a couple. Oh, allowing absentee ballots to be returned in person. We're one of 2 states in the whole country that doesn't allow absentee ballots to be returned in person. So identifying those areas where we're sort of an extreme outlier in the policy space. One thing I want to say on this slide is we are about a week away from releasing our 7th iteration of our State of Our State dashboard, which ranks Tennessee against peer states. In the past, it has been a sort of tile-based dashboard with 145 indicators. We have drastically improved it this year, and it is 145 metrics over 9 issue areas, which includes over 57,000 data points. So we went from 145 to 57,000 in the 2 years since we last updated it. We have also added a cover page with sort of the 15 metrics that matter most to economic mobility and access to opportunity, which we've based on existing frameworks around the country that look at those particular issue areas. And we've also added longitudinal data, and every chart is and graphic in the dashboard is downloadable, so you can download it and include it in your reports, as well as standing reports and graphics that you can download. So we're super excited about that and look forward to sharing that with you hopefully by the end of this week. So I'm going to jump right into a couple of slides on affordability, reliability, and clean energy. Mariah and Ethan mentioned this already. Tennessee is relatively unique in that we have, and most of you know this is a narrative that we've heard quite a bit, our electricity rates are relatively affordable compared to our peers across the country. We're 9th in terms of electricity rates. The problem is that we have some of the highest residential electricity consumption period across the country, 47th. There's a lot of reasons why this is. Our building codes are relatively outdated. We don't do a lot of energy code enforcement. We also have sort of low quality homes across the state that aren't energy efficient. So as a result, we have pretty high monthly electricity bills. This number has actually come down a little bit compared to peer states since we did this 2 years ago, but we're still 29th in terms of average monthly electricity bills. One thing that's important to note within Tennessee, we either get our power from a co-op or from a municipal local power company. And one thing that was interesting in our analysis is that the co-ops are about 2 cents higher per kilowatt average than the municipality local power companies on average. Mariah and Ethan talked about this as well, but I think it's something that's really important to talk about. We have pretty high energy burden in the state, particularly for low-income households. This was pretty shocking to us. In 64 counties, low-income households are paying 30% of their income on their energy bills. That's over almost 170,000 Tennessee households paying 30% of their income. 6% is considered affordable, just by a reference point. And there's 7 counties where low-income households are paying 34% or more. 1 in 10 Tennessee households have experienced energy insecurity. So energy insecurity is defined as you are choosing to forego some other need that you have in your household, whether it's groceries or other needs like that, to be able to pay your energy bill, or vice versa, you haven't been able to pay your energy bill because you need to be able to buy groceries. And again, where we rank and compared to other states is 37th on energy insecurity. So moving into reliability, this is something that we hear quite a lot from TVA and from our local power companies about how important energy reliability is. It oftentimes is something we hear about in the context of pursuing clean energy and why we can't be as ambitious when it comes to clean energy. So we thought it was really important to sort of dig into that data a little bit. The key takeaway is that we're not doing great on energy reliability, so maybe we could try a few other things to see how we can improve that. We looked at a couple of different measures of energy reliability, so the duration of power interruptions, frequency of power interruptions, and time to restore power. And as you can see, we're 50th in frequency of power interruptions, 46th in duration of power interruptions, and then 42nd in sort of time to restore power. The average Tennessean in 2023 lost power for 14 hours, which is pretty wild. And it takes about 5 hours to restore power. Okay, this is a very wonky graph. I apologize in advance, but I think it's really important. So if you are looking at this graph, the green line is the interruptions that happen because of all instances. So a major event day and a non-major event day. So we want to understand what's potentially, a major event day is when you're having an extreme weather event or a major storm weather event that could disrupt your power. Obviously, we're seeing those increase in the southeast as a result of climate change. So it's important for us to be tracking those, because if we were investing in more clean energy, we could bring those extreme weather events down. So on the top chart and the bottom chart, you can see that the dark orange line is sort of closer to the green line, and those are major event days. So the duration of our electric interruptions and the time to restore power are being driven by major event days. Frequency of interruptions, however, is being driven by non-major event days. So that actually signals that there's some issues with our grid and that we need to make pretty significant upgrades and in modernizing our grid to be able to address the frequency of interruptions. Last 2 slides are on clean energy. This is we rank 12 in the country in terms of clean energy generation. And again, Mariah and Ethan talked about this a little bit. One of the things that was really interesting in the report that we came out, we are a state that does not produce enough energy for the amount of energy that we use. I think it's almost like we use 3 times more power than we produce. So TVA has sort of made the decision that we are going to underproduce the amount of power we need and buy power from people around us. We are uniquely situated where we have about 5 or 6 other energy providers and energy grids that are around us, so usually we can buy power from them. When does that not work? Anybody remember Winter Storm Elliott? When the entire region is being impacted by an extreme weather event, you can't do that. They are using all their power, and then we get stuck without the power that we need. And then the other thing that Mariah and Ethan talked about, and I think I'll move to the next slide because it makes it a little bit clearer. So that dark orange line is the amount of coal that we've produced since 2013. We can see that that's going down pretty drastically. Nuclear is staying somewhat level, but has increased slightly, and is now our largest source of power in the state. The green and so the gray line is natural gas. That is starting to increase. Green is hydropower, and the green and blue lines down there at the bottom are wind and solar. And even though we've heard a lot about these sort of 500% increases in solar power, we're not moving that needle at all in terms of clean energy. So the reduction of coal and nuclear and hydropower is what sort of keeps us in the clean energy rankings, but we are seriously behind when it comes to wind and solar production. So just to ending with the key takeaways, which we've gone over already. Super important for us to have an understanding that while we do have relatively affordable electricity rates, we still have very high monthly energy bills, and we need to be digging into why that's the case. Affordability is the biggest issue in Tennessee right now. Childcare is expensive, housing is expensive, transportation is expensive, and energy is expensive. If we can bring down energy bills, we can make housing more affordable for people. So why is that happening, and how do we make energy more affordable, particularly for low-income households? The second one is reliability. Understanding that we are not doing great in reliability across any of the metrics, and how do we move forward programs and opportunities to improve that grid reliability while also increasing clean energy. These are a couple of QR codes. The top one is our Powering Up, which is our energy fact sheet that I just walked through. And then the bottom one is our current state of our state dashboard, which should be updated in like 2 or 3 days with the new dashboard. So strongly encourage you to check those out as we update them. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Erin. So we have an expert audience here. Let's take some questions. And we have an expert team to distribute the microphones to take the questions. And one thing I would just say briefly is something that I learned as I did research on energy is what tends to happen is we talk a lot about energy rates. But if you have a low rate, and yet we haven't invested in efficiency, then your energy burden can be high. And I think that explains a lot of what we've seen, which is that we have low rates here, but we haven't invested heavily in efficiency. So people are using more energy on average than they are elsewhere in the country, and that causes part of the problem we face. But let's say we got a question way in the back. Let's get started with that one. Is that Donnie?
And we're bringing the microphone around because we are recording this, so we want to be able to record your questions as well.
Ask us, I don't think we have to ask Donnie to do this, but ask us the hard questions if you would.
So my question is about referring to nuclear power as clean energy. I think that deserves a lot more discussion because there's a lot more there than meets the eye. And calling it clean energy is really a disservice to people. It's very misleading if you consider the whole nuclear fuel cycle from mining of the uranium to the disposal of the fuel, which we still can't figure out what to do with. And so, like I say, it's just a disservice, and if you would discuss how that falls into the clean energy category.
Yeah, I think Mike and I both have some comments on this. So in our report, we make a distinction between carbon-free energy and renewable energy. We do use the term clean energy when we include nuclear, but when we are talking about renewable energy, we do not. So we do have rankings in our report that specify the difference between renewable energy and clean energy. And to be honest, we have to have something where we can agree with TVA and local power companies about where we are making progress. Nuclear energy is carbon energy, and I think having a diverse energy grid is really, really important. I think the big conversation is about, let's not overbuild natural gas, let's start investing in solar and wind.
So I agree with your thought that we need to be really clear in our reports that we're distinguishing between clean energy and renewable energy, for example. We try to do that. And I think your point is well taken that nuclear is not carbon-free. It's just more complicated in calculating how much carbon gets emitted. I think on balance, most of the research I've seen suggests it's still a much lower carbon than burning either coal or natural gas. And my expert team is agreeing with that. I just want to make one point, which is we have one of the leading teams in the country that includes social and behavioral science and thinking about the environment. And I want to point out, is Jane Miller here? Jane? Lachlan Watkins, I want to call you Latham Watkins. Lachlan Watkins. Jane is a social psychologist, an expert in judgment decision making. Lachlan is an environmental economist. And one of the things we try to study is public acceptance of different sources. And we are all, as you all know in this room, we all live here in Tennessee, we're living in a world in which people are not supporting policies based on the substance of the policy. They're supporting policies based on whether they think that policy fits with their identity group or not. And an example of that is research that Lachlan has recently done that showed that if you're a conservative male that is exposed to the idea that mostly liberals are buying electric vehicles, there's basically no subsidy that we can find that's high enough. It's at least above $14,000 that would induce you to say you would buy one, right? And so why do I mention that in response to Donnie's very good question? Well, we've also done research on the idea of solution aversion, which is based on work done originally at Duke by Campbell and Kay, and we've done some follow-on work. And what Campbell and Kay found is that when liberals hear that nuclear power is the answer to climate change, they get less worried about climate change. That the solution itself drives the belief in the underlying threat. And the reverse is also true, which is when conservatives hear that taxes or regulation are the response to climate change, they get less worried about climate change. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to think about what mix of solutions might avoid this problem, which the social scientists call solution aversion, which is the reason why the last panel of the day you'll hear about today is about our private climate governance lab, which is looking at what can we do to motivate responses that even in this deeply polarized world still have some opportunity. Now, you may think I'm filibustering, but that's literally just a chance to try to explain what we're up to. And let's go ahead and go back to further questions. Yes?
Microphone. Yeah, I'm Paul Slentz. I'm with Tennessee Interfaith Power and Light. And basic question is, a lot of that data, does it come from the federal government?
Yes.
And what does all of this that's going on right now mean in terms of being able to know what's going on?
Well, luckily, if we don't know something's happening, it can't happen. So we're all good. Yeah, so, team, what do you think about the federal availability and non-federal availability of data?
Totally not to this, because I think that was we had this grand idea to create this report that would use data sources that were updated every year from the federal government and that would continue on and sort of support itself. And I think as we're sort of pulling out the data and starting to collect the data sets to then start rerunning all of the figures and updating sort of all of the graphics and things, I think there were several instances where the data just wasn't available or hadn't been updated or, so that's really affecting our ability to produce reports like this. I will say there's a lot of the sort of tools and things that have been removed. So when you think about like the climate and economic justice screening tool, right, that's a really fantastic federal tool that has since been removed. There are efforts to preserve it elsewhere, so it's still available. I do think it's going to become more important though for folks to be able to like do some of that work on their own, which I think is incredibly frustrating, right? But luckily you're able to like pull census data right from the source, or right, so we're able to sort of recreate some of these things without having the federal government do it for us, but I think it creates a huge burden for folks who maybe are not trained in mapping and census and all of these other things, right, that it takes to just get to the point of being able to show a nice graphic and to be able to make some of these comparisons. So a huge loss, I think, for this.
Oh, I'll just add, for both our Powering Up report and our State of Our State dashboard, we downloaded a lot of that data in September and October of last year. We didn't totally anticipate that it was not going to be available come January, February, but we had a sense that that might be possible. So the data that's included in our update, which will go live this week, will be some of the most recent data. Like I said, it's 57,000 data points. That's an interactive website directed to the Tennessee audience, so we've preserved a lot of that data. Our State of Our State dashboard actually uses a lot of state agency data. A lot of state departments publish that data in PDF format, so you cannot compare it across. So we had to copy and paste it off of PDFs and put it into an interactive database. We've just been shocked by the loss of data availability.
And obviously, the fact that we're doing this and the way we started the panel suggests that the availability of data, and not just raw data, but data that can be processed in ways that show you trends, et cetera, is just critical. It's a foundational element, and not just a foundational element to over-regulation, but if you're worried about regulation, to under-regulation as well, and to being efficient in the way we do this. So I would just say that for any of you who are working in this space, the ways that you can help us collect and make data available, despite the fact that we're seeing a lot of websites getting shut down, it could be very important for our work moving forward as well. Yeah. Go ahead.
Question for Erin. I was kind of shocked by the difference between 60% of the energy produced, you're defining as clean here in Tennessee, but only 23% of that which we consume is what you define as clean. Can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah, so the main difference between that discrepancy is the amount of power we produce versus the amount of power we consume. Because of the power that we are producing, the higher percentage of it is nuclear and hydro, again, compared to some of our peer states. That's why that number is significantly higher. And it means that a lot of the power we are buying off of the market to get up to our consumption numbers is coming from natural gas.
And just to, I think most people in this room know this, but Vanderbilt itself, I don't know if Jeff McDonald is here, former Vandy women's tennis coach, the national coach of the year, et cetera, but many of us got together and helped push Vanderbilt to commit to build a renewable power solar facility that will supply enough electricity to be equivalent to all the electricity the Vanderbilt campus uses. And Ann Davis and others at NES have helped us commit to developing new solar facilities that will use 5% of all the electricity that's distributed in the Nashville Electric Service distribution area. And that's the maximum right now that we can get through our agreement with TVA. So you do see efforts working on it, on those. And the challenge, I think, as Erin and as our data suggests, is that it still remains a very small share of the total. Yes.
First of all, I just want to acknowledge the amount of research that went into this. Thank you for providing incredible data from multiple sources that show us the trends over time and where we are based on the science that's out there. So thank you for an incredible job on that. It's very helpful. And sort of echoing a couple of the other questions in here. One is just a little bit of feedback. When we say that Tennessee is 47th in consumption of electricity, it seems like we should be like maybe third. Like flip that around, because 47 implies we're really low in energy consumption or electricity consumption.
Such a good point, and I absolutely should have said that. So we, the way that we've done that with our rankings is we've essentially made a judgment call in terms of good or bad. And number one is always good. 51st is always bad. So it can be difficult sometimes in some of the indicators, but we wanted to sort of make it consistent across the indicators. So the number of indicators where we're in the bottom 10 is high.
That makes a lot of sense. And getting back to that idea of judgment regarding data, because who defines what is clean energy? Is it the state legislature? Is it us? Because nuclear is not clean. It might be better, maybe we might want to consider how to present it to where it's cost-benefit based rather than our judgment of what is clean. So showing the life cycle consequences of each of these energy sources. Some would say wind power is not clean, right? So I think the question is, who defines what is clean?
It sounds like one of our special analyses for next year should be, let's really dive into what the state of the data might be on nuclear versus other sources and what the life cycle carbon emissions are. We could do that in our next report.
I love that idea, Mike. And I think just one other thing I want to say is that the data that we produce is for lots of audiences across Tennessee. So it has to be relevant to audiences like this, where I imagine there's a lot of people in the room who want to see Tennessee move forward on clean energy. It also has to be relevant to mayors, it has to be relevant to the governor's office, it has to be relevant to state legislators, it has to be relevant to TVA. So we do need to present it in a way that people feel like they can see themselves in, regardless of where they're coming to the issue.
Now, thank you. My question is directed to Ethan about the burden that AI data centers will present to the grid and to TVA in particular. And my reading of the literature, at least what I've seen, is that they're widely disparate. And my second point is, as a result, this is a history to be written. We don't know. So the question now becomes, and my question is actually in two parts. The first is, how should the cost of that be apportioned among people who have to pay for it through their residential rates in particular? Okay, and the second point is, since these data centers tend to be located in rural areas, or a lot of them, are on a reasonable amount of land, why can't they bring their power with that? And I refer to, and I have the reference on my hard drive at home, but Andrew Dessler and Zeke Hofstadter have done analyses on the relative costs for data centers to provide their own power through solar and battery backup compared to their purchasing it using, say, natural gas off the grid. So that's a very involved question, a lot of points, but say what you want to say.
I have lots of thoughts, but I'll try to keep it brief. So I think when you think about cost, that's a huge, huge issue. I mean, looking at Virginia, Northern Virginia, and then parts of Washington, there was a really great ProPublica piece that Mariah shared about the costs of energy for users in Washington. And I think that's a huge open question. I mean, I have my own personal opinions about that I'm happy to share sort of one-on-one. But I think that there's definitely room for those data centers to be doing something like you're saying, sort of co-locating energy and producing that energy on site so that they can offset those costs for consumers. Because it really isn't fair for the average grid consumer to be paying for these data centers that Microsoft or Amazon is creating in their areas without much consultation. I think one of the challenges there is when you look at a state like Ohio, which has recently localized their energy production. Now local governments can say, we don't want solar. Like, if you're gonna bring the data center here, we can cancel the solar plan that goes along with it. And so as these energy sources become more polarized, that can create even greater issues in rural communities, which may be particularly susceptible to mis or disinformation on those energy sources. And so I think that touches a little bit on your second point, where most of these are being located in rural areas. I think it would be great if they can bring their power with them. I think that would be, there's been some really promising technology on that. I mean, as price of battery storage and renewables goes down, I really think that, in my personal opinion, ought to be the future. I think also if you look at SMRs, they're small modular nuclear reactors, that's something that's maybe coming a little bit further down the line. Granted, there's these questions about how clean that power is, but I would argue that it's far better than developing new LNG plants to power this new demand. And so I don't know if I exactly answered your question there, but I'm fully on board. It's very well taken, and I personally agree very strongly with the sort of implied points there.
So Caroline, I think our next question is over here on the far other side. And while you're walking over there, just a couple of quick thoughts about things that our program are doing on this. We just had a workshop on this, and we've had Tyler Norris from Duke who came and gave a talk here last year, talk about how research that they recently published shows that very small changes in the timing of data center use can actually have very large effects on the total demand. And so we should be really cautious about just accepting this notion that there's going to be massive demand growth. It might occur, and we need to think about it, but we also need to think about the historical phenomenon where projections about electricity use have been high in almost every case over the last 4 years. And you would ask, well, why is that true? Well, the more capital you invest, the more revenue you can get under most pricing structures that utilities operate under. So what incentive do they have to underpredict future electricity growth, right? And there's great work by Michael Ware at Stanford on that, and Lachlan, our economist, has done some research into that. The last two things I'll say really quickly are Jane Miller, who's our social psychologist, and I are working on a project where we're thinking about if when you did a ChatGPT search, if the amount of electricity you used and the carbon emissions associated with that research came up at the time you did it, would it induce you to change the way you use that in ways that lowered those things? And even if it didn't change your behavior, would the threat of that change the way electricity is provided and the way these companies select which data centers to use and how to design the programs? So that's an example of how we can use information disclosure, which is what this study is all about. It's a way to drive those kind of changes. And the last thing I would say is think for a moment, because we are going to do a program on private climate governance at the end of the day. Why are the emissions not even higher from data center use? And it's largely because, for better or worse, Amazon and Google and Microsoft have made commitments to reduce their carbon emissions. Is there any government requirement in the United States that requires them to do that? None. Zero. So when we see pressure by these companies to reduce carbon emissions, even if they fail on some level, what we need to understand is why do they feel the need to make that commitment, and why do they feel the need to stick with that commitment to some extent? And that's part of what we're trying to research is how can we get some viable solutions even in this deeply partisan and polarized era. But let's get to our last question here, and I'm sorry for the long response.
I'm Catherine Bombly. Thank you so much for this report and for being good stewards of this data. And since you are the area experts currently of this data, because it's lagging indicator, it's all lagging indicator data, right? What do you predict we need to be paying attention to as far as specific points of the data that we need to follow in the coming year and in the short-term horizons?
So thinking about the things that have really been removed, one really, in my opinion, scary thing that got removed was FEMA's Future Risk Index. So basically projecting for every county in the US what the future sort of estimated annual loss is for 5 different disasters. That got wiped about a week or two ago.
Which, by the way, we have, I think,
Yeah,
downloaded.
we did download
so if
it,
anyone
but-
ever wants that, let us know.
Yeah, and so, I think when you think about one, sort of putting your head in the sand on these really important issues, and it doesn't matter whether you sort of, to Mike's joke earlier, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at it or not, these things are going to happen. And two, I think a lot of, I know this can be sort of a buzzword, but the justice elements are really, really suffering right now. When you think about a lot of the frontline communities, the communities that are suffering most from environmental health damages, from pulmonary and cardiac issues because of environmental threats, those folks are going to be the people who lose access to this life-saving information. And it really is life-saving, both over the short and long term. And so I think as researchers, really highlighting communities who might lose access to information and lose access to their ability to plan and to act according to the reality on the ground will be really, really fundamental.
Just a couple of things that I would add to that. TVA is in the process of updating its integrated resource plan right now. And so that's trying to predict sort of where they will get their power, where they'll produce their power over the next 25 years. We've seen the draft report, we're waiting for the final report. This is a process that largely goes unnoticed by media in the state. I think the Knoxville Sentinel covers it sometimes, Chattanooga Free Press does sometimes, almost no articles about it in the Tennessean. Nashville Banner did a couple this fall, but these are hugely important decisions that are being made on our behalf as grid payers. And the big discussion over the next 5 to 6 years is how many natural gas plants will TVA build? And there's no reason for them to be building. I think in the IRP, they're talking about like 8 gigawatts to 25 gigawatts over the next 25 years. That's just a tremendous amount of natural gas. So that's one thing that comes out in the data for me. It's about natural gas and solar. The second thing is about the energy burden and energy efficiency programs. We have a huge opportunity, a bipartisan opportunity to make really big improvements in grid modernization. And also we are super far behind in building codes. When we update our building code, we make amendments to it, which makes it not as strong. We aren't doing energy code enforcement very well as a state. These are opportunities that local governments can be making progress on without help from the state, without help from the federal government. We would like that help, of course, but we can do it even without that assistance. The Home Energy Uplift Program is a joint program between local power companies, TVA, and local governments to do energy efficiency retrofits on low-income households. That program needs like a couple millions more dollars, yes. So these are opportunities where we can move forward, but the data shows that's where we should focus.
The last little yellow flag that I saw in the data, and I don't know if my colleagues saw it, was water quality's gotten worse in Tennessee. And during the lifetime, almost everyone in this room, water quality got better year over year over year. I don't know if that's a long-term trend or not, or if that's a one-off phenomenon, but it's something we should keep an eye on moving forward, because we wouldn't expect otherwise in a world of increasing sophistication and environmental protection for that to occur. Well, with that, we need to wrap up. Let's thank our panel.
Since 2010, it's been a negative trend in water quality.
Something we should all be thinking and be concerned about. So let's thank our panelists.